Alright everyone, we start off today with economic news. For the very first time, gas in the United States in every state is averaging more than $4.50 a gallon, and the actual price tends to be higher in a slew of states. In some cases, I think it's now at like $5 a gallon. Not sure exactly what it is in California, but they have that problem. It doesn't help when you hyper-tax everything. This is now beginning to erode the middle class. If gas prices rise, normally, who's most impacted? People who commute and they don't have a lot of money. Working class, people who are poor and stuff like that. The middle class can usually absorb some price hikes. Like inflation of, let's say it was 4%, middle class will largely shrug it off. Unless you're in the lower middle class, you're on the margin of the working class. The prices rise and you grumble about it. When gas prices are this high, it begins to impact people that generally are relatively well shielded from economic problems. You have to have a significantly bad economy for them to be highly affected. The Great Recession, for example, that'd be a good example. Housing bubble bursts. People in the middle class are losing work. Their wages are being eroded and so forth. They started having home foreclosures and so forth. The economy got wrecked for the better part of a decade, and you had people with master's degrees lining up to, flip burgers, effectively. A topsy-turvy and dysfunctional economy. Under the latter part of Obama, and through Trump's tenure, the economy was reasonably good. And it does really begin with Obama. Much of the unemployment had gone away. The housing bubble had mostly healed. Things weren't great. They definitely were a lot better under Trump, but they had healed generally speaking. So you had a period of about 5 years, 6 years where things are acceptable. In the last year and a half of Bidenomics, all of that progress that was made has been completely reversed with the exception of one metric in the economy, which is unemployment. Labor force participation shenanigans notwithstanding, literally everything else right now is lined up to go dangerously wrong. You do have another housing bubble, that seems clear. You have a student loan debt bubble, which is being inflated artificially by Biden by not restoring the proper working order of how debt is supposed to work. You have what I believe will become stagflation when your inflation rate's above 8% and probably still rising. I think that the last month's data was a blip, much like the prior April. The inflation rate ticked down very slightly. I don't think that's the beginning of a downwards trend. And even if it stabilizes and remains above 8 points, at some point, employers will begin cutting jobs because there will be a lack of demand. People will run out of that money that they had saved up during the Trump times maybe, or when they got their stimulus, their check from the government for COVID. They go back to work. They've got a little bit of savings maybe. This is the case for the middle class, but they're losing it because prices are so high. What will happen is that in order to preserve their economic stability, they will have to cut costs, which means that you will sell less products. It's quite simple. It's elementary, my dear Watson. Thus, the businesses make less money. Thus, they start cutting jobs. And then the demand goes down a bit further. At some point, you achieve equilibrium, but it's a matter, under stagflation, it's a matter of how much woe you end up with. Now they're raising interest rates to try to throttle back the inflation. That'll probably cause economic problems too. They're aiming for what they call a soft landing. I'm skeptical as to whether the current incarnation of the economic system in the United States can weather it. I'm very, very skeptical. Gas prices, though, are a pretty good companion to the overall health of the economy. $4.50 a gallon is massively excessive for gas, and there's no reason for this to be happening. The U.S. is fundamentally capable of being energy independent and being a net exporter of things like liquefied natural gas to places like Europe. We could be raking in the dough, but the companies aren't willing to do that because here's the thing. They look at the Biden admin, and this is why they're not doing drill baby drill in all of their oil fields and massively expanding despite supposedly having record profits. That's really a lie because it's based on the devaluation of the dollar, but we'll get past that and argue devil's advocate. Why wouldn't I, energy company, oil prices are high, why wouldn't I drill a new well in a place that I thought that I could make money in? Because I'm looking at what Biden is saying, and I don't have any faith in the administration not to cancel the permit halfway through, so I've invested a bunch of money. They're just basically telling me to fuck off. They do a new tax or something that they're encouraging people to buy less oil, so it's going to be less profitable even if it's higher amounts of money per unit that I'm able to make. I won't be able to sell as many units. There could be a change in the admin's doctrine. Oil prices go down and all of a sudden they start re-regulating oil or natural gas or whatever I'm involved in. The economy hits recession conditions. People are capable of traveling less, and again, that gas is now, it's pointless to drill it out. All I'm doing is watering down the stock and making less money. I have to fire workers. I have to abandon a couple of rigs or something. Of course I'm not going to invest in making more energy. Biden keeps pressuring Iran and Venezuela into selling it to us, and pressuring OPEC to throttle up production. It's like, well, why don't you do it yourself? We've got all the oil and gas in the world, more than we could possibly use. Some people are saying, well, the gas prices are rising because we're hitting peak oil. No, we're not. We're nowhere near that. They thought peak oil back in the 70s and 80s and stuff like that. Now we found that actually with better drilling techniques is a shit ton more oil than anyone ever anticipated. Texas alone could probably supply the whole world with oil for another decade or so. It's there. It's waiting. Why aren't we using it? It's sort of like with baby formula. There's no reason why there should have been a hyper-regulatory block on importation anyway. Never should have existed. And it never should have shut down one of the main factories making it without some sort of a backup plan. I suppose that was a little bit of a lack of foresight by the centralized forces of the U.S. government that meddle in business constantly, and then people wonder why those businesses have issues. The problem with 450 is that it's also an indicator of the overall unhealth of the economy. It's roughly tied in with inflation in general. It's pacing it fairly well. This is why we know it's Bidenomic. He will come out, if prompted by this at all, and say that it's Putin's fault. I would like to point out that only a tiny minority of all of the U.S.'s imported oil comes from Russia. It has basically no effect on the oil prices in the United States. What does is that when you have inflation and the price of everything is going up, gas is going to pace with that inflation. If it doesn't, the gas companies are effectively losing money. When they talk about record corporate profits, we'll return to that subtopic here for a moment. They are talking about an amount measured in increasingly devalued US dollars. If you have a 10% rise in the cost of everything, and you don't have at least a 10% commensurate rise in the profitability, you are making less profits year over year than you did the prior year. It is basic fundamental math. So when I see record corporate profits, I say, huzzah, they're still breaking even. That's good. It means the economy is not currently going into a tailspin. It probably will be soon. I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if we end up in a stagflationary recession for several years. We could have a double dip recession. Maybe it's V-shaped. Maybe we're lucky. Things collapse for a few months and then they start to really rapidly ramp back up. The economy goes into full correction mode and basically resets itself like a computer. That'd be great. It's just not particularly likely. No, more likely is that we're probably in an economic problematic situation through 2024, 2025. Which, by the way, is not going to be helpful to the Democrats. If you look at the results of the special Pennsylvania and North Carolina primaries the other day, you can probably get a read about what's happening in the United States at the moment. But the prices are still rising. Biden claimed he was going to bring them down last month. I'm going to free up strategic oil from the reserves. The price would be like 2 or 3 cents higher a gallon if he hadn't. It would barely affect it. He might as well not even bother burning through the strategic reserves. You're so gung-ho for handouts for foreign countries. Why don't you just airlift all of that strategic oil to Ukraine? You're already pissing away every other aspect of the U.S. economy. Wouldn't even particularly surprise me if that plan was actually on the table behind closed doors in the White House at the moment. So yeah, thank you, Joe Biden. Really cool, and this is going to affect other economies. The United States stops buying so much, you're also going to import less. It'll cause economic problems in other countries. Likewise, those people buy less of the U.S. goods because now their purchasing power is lower. We're looking at a reset economically. Not necessarily great reset. Hopefully we can avoid that. But we're looking at the economy collapsing effectively back to some lower sum which actually represents reality. It's been hyperinflated, pumped to death, and speculated to death. We get a bunch of bubbles all over the world. China's the biggest bubble waiting to pop as we speak as well. All of these things, unfortunately, can trigger one another in a can of worms opening situation that causes a global depression. It could last for a decade. It could be like the Great Depression. It could also predicate World War III and kill off most of mankind, just to be clear about the severity of the situation and why we need to exile all of the globalists to Madagascar so that they get plague, hopefully, and we can rid the world of their stupidity. That's about all. Peace out.